Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is U.S. Marine Corps veteran Wade Spann. He served in Iraq from the very first moments of the war. He was later wounded in the fierce fighting inside Fallujah. He later embarked on a nationwide journey to connect with his Marine Corps buddies and others facing challenges back on the home front. And Wade, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Greg. Just wanted to correct, I got wounded outside of Fallujah, a little town called Al-Karma, northeast of Fallujah. It was after we did the invasion in the spring of '04. So just wanted to clarify that.
Near Fallujah. Gotcha. We'll definitely talk more about that in a little bit. But let's start at the beginning of your story. Where were you born and raised?
Born and raised in Fairfax, Virginia. I grew up in Burke. In fact, my parents still live in the mean streets of Burke.
Excellent. So when did you join the Marine Corps, and why did you decide to join the Corps?
So I joined the Marine Corps actually as a junior in high school. I depped in early because I realized, college for me was probably not the best idea at the time. I didn't have the maturity or the drive for that. And so I joined, depped in, and then when I graduated, I had a choice of time to go to boot camp. And so I picked August 2001.
Which is a month before 9/11. Where'd you go for boot camp?
Parris Island.
You did go to Parris Island.
Correct.
Okay, we'll get to 9/11 in a second. We can't just gloss over Parris Island. What kind of a culture shock was that for you?
Oh, wow. Just thinking back on it, it was definitely a time where I was just, butterflies in your stomach and getting off that plane, and then just being herded and moved around. Very confusing, disorienting, intentional, of course. But it was something that I was so looking forward to, and I was just ready to, commit myself to that endeavor.
So even in the difficult moments, you knew this was the right move for you?
Oh, without a doubt.
Excellent. All right, let's talk about 9/11 now. What were you doing when you found out about it?
So we were in swim qual week when 9/11 happened. From my recollection, they quickly pulled us out of the pool, got us out of the pool, marched us to the barracks, and they proceeded to yell at us that we were going to war. Now, every recruit thinks that's what the drill instructors do at one point or time in the training. However, the DIs kept on going in and out of the hut and then coming out even more pissed off and angry. And slowly that afternoon, it was the morning the attacks happened, and slowly that afternoon, we started to piece together. And then that evening, the CO came and spoke to us and briefed us on what had happened. I think, if I can recall, we saw some photos, I think the next day, of what happened. However, the whole time in boot camp, I never saw any of the footage.
So you didn't really have much access to the outside world during that time?
Intentionally, yes. No, no access. Now, when the attacks did happen, they did say, hey, if you recruit, if your family or something works in the World Trade Center, please come and we'll give you a chance to call home. I believe we had one recruit who lost a cousin in the towers. I myself, they asked if I would like to call home because my father did do business in the Pentagon for his job. I think I was able to call, if I remember, a quick 30-second, yeah, everybody's fine, and then hung up. So that was the most extent of what I can remember from 9/11.
Once you knew everybody was okay, how much time did you spend thinking about how different your Marine Corps career is going to be now that this has happened?
This is going to sound kind of bad, but at a young age like that, I just felt like I'd done the right decision, and I was ready to go to war. And I was like, all right, this is, I joined in peacetime, but fully expected or prepared to go to war. And this sort of solidified my decision. I right then and there, I knew I'd made the right decision. That, being in the infantry Marine Corps service member was the right decision for myself.
So you graduate from Parris Island, and then what?
Parris Island, graduated in November, then had about a week home, and then reported to Camp Geiger, which is down near Lejeune in North Carolina, for SOI training, School of Infantry.
Okay, and how long were you there?
3 months. And, normal training, got the training done, and then I distinctly remember them calling out units, and the majority of the guys all stayed in Lejeune except for the people lower in the alphabetical order. And they yelled out Victor 1-5 to a few of us, and lo and behold, that's out in the West Coast. So I was very, very pleased with that decision. I was ecstatic. I didn't want to stay in Lejeune. It just wasn't the place I wanted to do my 4 years. So going out to California was a real good trip for me.
Is that Camp Pendleton?
Yes, correct. Camp Pendleton, California, where I was up at 5th Marine Regiment, or 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, on the north side of base.
Talk about your time there.
Wow. So arrived in San Diego, got shuttled on the base, and then processed. And then eventually late that evening after dark, got brought up to camp, San Mateo, which is Area 62, I believe, up in Pendleton, and got dropped to my to weapons company, and was welcomed by my seniors, and just was, of course, a little jittery, a little nervous. You'd heard stories and rumors, and it was from then on. It was on. I was the new guy on deck, and learning experiences every day.
You had a little smile there when you said welcomed by your seniors. Was that more than a handshake and a pat on the back?
Some might have been, but it was all for camaraderie, and it was all good in my book.
So we'll leave that classified. So how long were you there then before deploying to the Middle East?
So let's see, I got there 2002, early 2002. Got to the fleet. That unit had already been stood up to go to Tajikistan after 9/11. However, they were stood down. And so we just started doing our normal workup training to be a deploying unit, with MUSOC capable, of course. What was that? Marine Expeditionary Unit, Special Operations capable. So we just started training. First getting the lay of the land, getting understanding, what I would be doing within weapons company. I got assigned the Javelin. Became a Javelin gunner, so I got proficient with that, as well as learning, because we were a weapons company, we were mounted Humvees, so I started learning to, PM the vehicles, and it just a lot of learning when you get to the fleet that early on. So we did that from 2002, and then rolling into 2003, we started getting all of our certifications and doing all of our work up to prior to deployment. However, I want to say in the fall of 2003, no wait, that wouldn't be right. 2002, fall of 2002. Yeah, correct. Thank you. They sort of had said, "Hey, we're not going to have a normal deployment. It looks like we're going to go to Iraq, or we're going to war." And so, at that age, an 18, 19-year-old newly joined Marine is eager and ready for it. So, I was excited.
So you had a couple months to realize what you were headed towards. When did they actually send your unit over?
So I believe late January of 2003 into maybe February, we flew out to Kuwait. It was actually a pretty interesting flight. We flew commercial. I want to say it was like either Continental or American Airlines. Yeah. And it was interesting. I remember it distinctly because we had our weapons on board, of course, and flight stewardess were more than gracious with us. They were loving. But they had the cockpit door open. And I remember that, being able to walk up there during the, it was a long flight. I think it was over 20. We stopped in Germany, but we flew from California all the way to Germany for refuel and then down to Kuwait. And I just distinctly remembering having the cockpit open. You could go up there and talk to the pilots and actually see the horizon up in the air. And that was pretty neat.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an experience.
Yeah, that's pretty good security. They didn't need to close the cockpit doors on that flight.
Correct. Yeah, and then when we landed in Kuwait, it was funny. The stewardess were literally like thinking this was the last thing. They were shuttling us with Cokes, waters, any snacks we wanted from, they were just basically gutting whatever they had on the plane to give to us. It was nice. I got off the plane, got put on buses. Then we followed a Humvee, an MP Humvee, out into the desert. Literally had no clue which was up, down, left, right. All the way out to this spot in the desert where the only thing out there I distinctly remember was a generator with a light, and that was it. And that was our camping spot. So we broke out our 2-man tents and bivouacked that night, and then woke up to the sun and sort of started getting our surroundings.
So what did you do while you were still in Kuwait, waiting for what you assumed would come?
So since we were a weapons company, we had to pull off gear from ships. Luckily I wasn't on that working party, but a lot of guys had to go down to the port and actually pick up the Humvees and get all of our gear, from the the maritime pre-positioning ships. And then we started, PMing the vehicles, getting them ready for combat. Started training with them as well. Started doing drills, exercises, a lot of field ops. While we were in Kuwait, they slowly, I just remember our little tent city slowly became they started building those big 40 or 50 man tents in the background behind us. Slowly started building the infrastructure there to house us. But we still stayed in 2-man tents for a majority of that time. I think once a week they'd bring us hot chow, but other than that, we were on MREs and just getting ready for war. And it was exciting times.
When and how did you find out it was go time?
I think it was the night before we had a battalion MWR night, so people were doing skits and contests and stuff like that. And I believe the next day is when they sort of broke the word that, hey, we're gonna our departure time, crossing the LOD line of departure, is going to be next morning at 03 or whatever it was. And so we headed to, the first thing was to head to the ammo supply points, pick up all of our ammo, pick up all of our, that stuff. And then we headed out out into the desert. We left those camps behind, and we headed out into the desert and set up our camping net and parked our vehicles under there, and then got ready for go time.
Wow. Wade, let's pause right there.
Sure.
We'll talk about go time when we come back on Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles on the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined today by Wade Spann. He's a U.S. Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War. And I know our listeners and viewers don't want to wait any longer. What was it like when you crossed that line into Iraq? Oh,
that was exciting times. I remember, we were told, I think every unit's told they're the first ones across the LOD, but we had the confidence that we were going. The engineers in front of us blew the berm, and we were off. And I remember looking through my night vision goggles and out into the horizon. You could see our artillery firing off into the distance, and you could see the rocket boosters they had on those artillery rounds. I forget the acronym for them, but they were firing off in the distance, and just everything was sort of moving in sync. And it was actually like almost felt like a well-oiled machine as our battalion moved across the LOD, and our objective was the Ramallah oil fields, and we had been training for that target for a few weeks prior to departure, and we were weapons company following in with Alpha Company, who was actually going to hit the ground. And that morning, as the sun broke, we started taking that objective, and there was some Iraqis that still there. Most of them were waving flags and stuff like that. That morning, we experienced our first casualty of the war, which was Lieutenant Childers, who was killed when a Jeep came out of a tank pit waving a white flag. However, as the vehicle approached the Marines, the guy in the back, I guess, had second thoughts, reached down, pulled out his AK, and started shooting. Lieutenant Childers, from what I understand, caught a ricochet bullet off the asphalt and under his SAPI plate, and where it hit one of the major arteries or something like that, and he bled out that morning. So the reality of war quickly struck home, and I remember it happening about 400, 500 meters to my right, as we were pulling to the left to cover the flank of Alpha Company and taking care of some other vehicles that were out in the distance and some tanks and stuff like that. That was, eye-opening, and to see that happen, and to know that this war was going to have life-changing impact on everybody's lives. So we got into position in the left flank, and then we had some targets, and we actually shot a couple tow missiles, and secured some prisoners, and started dealing with EPWs and handling a lot. We got a lot of people surrender, so we're dealing with that, and that was an experience in itself.
Talk about what a tow missile is, and I believe you are believed to be either the first or one of the first to score a hit with the tow missile in the war.
Yeah, my vehicle, actually that was Corporal Brzezowski who shot that tow missile. But yeah, I had my clue. I wanted to shoot the Javelin, but I believe the price tag on them is discouraging for us to just shoot them willy-nilly. The tow is a wire-guided missile. The technology dates back to, I want to say, the 60s or 70s, but very effective weapon, very long range. It sits on top of the Humvee, and it's very capable round. We hit a vehicle that was out there, and there was probably some people in it, and so that was the first start, and that was exciting times to be able to be a part of that. Just the whole day, that day morphed into the next day and the next day because we didn't get a whole lot of rest the next 72 hours. And of course, you didn't sleep prior to that invasion.
Right. So you secured your objective,
Mm-hmm.
and then did you hold that, or did you keep pushing on?
So we held it for, I want to say, a few days, and then the British came in and replaced us. And then from there, we just started pushing up north, and we were on our way. I mean, we were flying up the highways, and it quickly became apparent that the AAVs that most of our line companies were in, there were some issues with them. Every once in a while, they'd break down, and Marines would have to cross deck from one vehicle, from one AAV to the next. And normally 18 Marines in there is pretty packed, and they were putting in up to 30 some odd guys in those things. So they were tightly packed in those AAVs. But we pushed north. I remember cutting through Basra on the outskirts of that, and we'd heard about the American POWs and stuff like that. And we pushed out that way.
Did you get stuck in any sandstorms along the way?
Oh yeah, that one sandstorm came through, and it was crazy. We literally hit ground to a standstill. That sandstorm, I couldn't tell you how many days it was since the invasion. Maybe a week, or I don't know. All those days sort of merged together nowadays. But yeah, I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face, and so I put my gas mask. We just sort of put our gas masks on because we thought the respirators would help us breathing. But the one unique thing about putting those gas masks on is it calms you down your breathing. It regulates it to so much that you actually get in a rhythm, and they're usually, I found, and a lot of us found, that you can fall asleep easily on those gas masks, which isn't a good thing because people think you're dying of something, of chemical warfare or something. But yeah, I remember that that sandstorm hit, and we just ground to a halt. And it was so bad, people were getting lost, stepping out of their vehicles just to use the head. So you're very mindful to keep contact and just push through. I remember that next morning we just had a mess to clean up. All of our weapons were dirty. We just had to take a good hour or so to recollect ourselves, resupply, and we pushed on.
We're talking with Wade Spann. He's a U.S. Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War. We're going to talk more about his service in combat and also the important work that he's done since coming back home. We'll be right back on Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles on the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined today by Wade Spann, a U.S. Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War. And Wade, just before the break, we were talking about surviving the sandstorm and the initial engagement with the Iraqis in March of 2003. Let's continue on the push to Baghdad now. After the sandstorm, what kind of resistance did you face?
We had a couple villages take shots at us on the road, so we, engaged. And then pushing up, we were going to go east and come into Baghdad from, at the time it was called Saddam City, now it's called Sadr City. As we pushed up, we had to first cross Saddam's bridge. Before we crossed that, we had to stop a couple times to let our logistics catch up, get our fuel and ammunition and as well as food. I remember distinctly we had 3 rounds of incoming from the Iraqi artillery come hit us one afternoon or evening. That was scary. Those incoming was scary. But quickly our counter battery, those guys just lit it up. So I don't know what happened to those Iraqis, but they probably didn't have a good day. Then the next day we had orders, and we were a main element with some of the Abrams tanks to push over, secure Saddam's bridge, make sure it didn't get blown, take that, and then we'd push farther northeast and then come around into Saddam City. I remember distinctly looking as we approached the bridge, puffs of and clouds of smoke in the air popping, and it quickly dawned on me that those were enemy mortars dropping on us, doing airbursts and stuff like that. So it was definitely go time. I remember as we approached the bridgehead. The Abrams were side by side with us. Some of our gunners were engaging. I remember the Abrams tank firing its main battle cannon right next to us, and like I could see the whole hood of the Humvee bow at the overpressure. That was exciting times. Quickly, as I saw a Zeus tank sort of level its guns, which is 4 anti-aircraft guns, Chevy and the Gun 1 truck with Corporal Mahon as a VC engaged and just destroyed that threat, which was very threatening. And then we crossed the bridge, secured it with all the line companies and their AAVs and the Abrams, and then did a battle damage assessment. And then I believe we probably hung in place maybe that night, and then we started pushing again into Baghdad. We got into outskirts of Saddam City, and we have a few days there. We tried to prevent looting and stuff like that. You don't want the Iraqis looting with RPGs and stuff like that. And then we had orders that the last known site where Saddam had made a public appearance was his mosque, and we were the main element. Our battalion was going to go in there and take over these palaces that he was supposed to be in, as well as hit that mosque and see if he was there. We had a special forces detachment with us, but I couldn't tell you what the unit was. As we approached Baghdad, the heart of the city, they had the Fedayeen fighters, which were Saddam's loyal guys, set off an 18-wheeler full of gas, blew up. So it sort of ignited let everybody know that we were in town. And as we came to that city, we called it the Gauntlet afterwards, but it was a gunfight that whole night. We came in there 0 dark 30, and we didn't stop until about 8 hours later. We had to backtrack in some of our routes, and it was definitely nerve-wracking. Seeing guys hop in between buildings, and just eerily like what I had seen in, say, Black Hawk Down, the movie, and it was definitely kinetic that day. We secured the palace, took it, and then some of the Fedayeen tried to overrun the position. We took some hostages or prisoners. I'm sorry. We had our own wounded. We took casualties that day. Gunnery Sergeant Bohr from Alpha Company was killed. We had the Chinooks or the 46s come in and drop off ammo and pick up wounded, and it was pretty kinetic that morning. We had to have A-10s come in for close air support as well, and we secured that palace, and we were there for the next, I want to say, 2 or 3 weeks. Alpha Company hit the mosque. Of course, Saddam wasn't there, as history tells, and we had that as our AO for the next couple of weeks, and then the Army replaced us, and then we headed down south to Diwania, where we sort of hung out for a minute or two for at least a month, I'd say, and then bust us down to Kuwait and out of country.
Well, a lot of people who obviously weren't there will talk about how quickly U.S. forces got to Baghdad and secured Baghdad. You've talked about how intense the fighting has been, certainly in Baghdad and even on the way to Baghdad. So what's it like as someone who went through it and lost friends to hear, well, that was the easy part and then it got hard later?
Yeah, that was definitely, there was no easy part of that. It was always a challenge. People are entitled to their opinions, but being there and experiencing it firsthand, it was challenging. But we were a competent force. We had trained together. We had really molded. We were a very close-knit platoon, and we were successful because of that, I believe.
So you were taken out of country, and when did you come back?
So I got back in, I think, to California, I think that June. Then we had quickly had a couple, a 30-day leave block, and then came back, and we were told that we were going to redeploy to Okinawa, and then from there go back into Iraq the following year. And that was late fall of 2003, or beginning of fall of 2003. So in the December, we flew to Okinawa. We were supposed to go there for training and picking up equipment. We did that, and then we boarded planes for about 2 months, and then we boarded planes and flew to Kuwait, And then from Kuwait, we went to, I want to say we flew into Al Asad, and then from Al Asad, we got sent out to east of Fallujah, camp called Camp Bukrib, which was, a few clicks right down the road from 1st Marine Division's headquarters. And our AO was northeast of Fallujah, which was the town called Al Karma, as well as I think Charlie Company operated out of the Abu Ghraib prison.
What was that like?
After being in combat that first time, I think all of us were a little bit cocky and arrogant, having survived and come back. However, things quickly changed for us. Our platoon, Task Force Red Cloud, led by Lieutenant Glover, I think we were helping our fellow battalion out. I think their unit was 2-1 or 1-1. They had Fallujah, and they asked us to come assist them in a cordon, and so we did. And our platoon, we started seeing RPGs skipping down Route Michigan at our cordon position, and mortars started getting dropped on us, and one of our guys got shot. So quickly, after those first couple weeks there, we realized this was a really a kinetic place. And then later on, I think in March, the 4 Blackwater guys got murdered. So quickly, we knew something was going to happen. And our response was swift. We packed up out of our FOBs and headed south of Fallujah, where we staged, and then we pushed into Fallujah from the south. Our battalion objective at first was to take the soda factory that became our headquarters, and then we pushed up in the lines all the way up to Route Michigan, which is sort of like the dividing main highway through the city, and held those positions. I mean, it was all out. We had the Spectre gunship there, and we had a lot of assets on hand. But yeah, the enemy was prepared for us, and they were ready to fight. And we took a lot of ground in those first couple of days, and then politics stepped in.
Explain.
As we were taking locations in Fallujah, hard-fought battles, the local Iraqi politics stepped in, asked for us to not take over the city or not do any more advancing. So, as they were trying to broker a peace deal, unfortunately, history shows that peace deal was nothing sort of what it needed to be, and we had to do some pretty amazing things in that city while we were still doing operations. Our platoon was designated a quick reaction force for the whole battalion. So anytime an incident happened, we were the ones that responded. I remember outside of Fallujah one night, a CH-53 was shot down, and so we responded to that crash site. The bird had been shot down, but it had a fellow helicopter with it. It had landed, I believe, picked up the casualties, tried to take as much serialized gear, and then was out of there. When we got there, the Spectre gunship showed us, it has this, they call it Finger of God. It's an IR light that we used this to help us get on site. We secured that site, and that morning, I had what we called Saddam's Revenge, which was the double dragon. Food poisoning, I would say food poisoning, but it's something, stomach bug. And so I didn't sleep that night. I sort of posted watch because I couldn't sleep. That morning, as the daylight hit, mortars hit off in the distance, and then 20 minutes later, another mortars got close. So we knew we were being bracketed, and the Humvee in front of us, a high back Humvee. All these Humvees they weren't up armed. They were sort of they were quote unquote up armored by us. They had some armor plates, but they were nothing like the fully armored Humvees that we had in say 2005 in Ramadi. They took some casualties from the mortar round, and so then Lieutenant Glover decided, hey, we need to get these guys to medical, and we're going to just have them bomb this site. I think we were going to wait around for them to bring in a flatbed truck to put the aircraft on and tow it out of there so it can be used for propaganda. As we mounted up and headed out of that crash site, the enemy ambushed us, and we were in a firefight through a good while through town, and that's when Private Boy was killed by an RPG while I was manning the saw, and that was a hard one. We got to the Cloverleaf outside of Fallujah, on the east of Fallujah, and that's where we dropped off the casualties that we had taken. And then we headed back to the soda factory and sort of relaxed. Doc gave me an IV and recuperated. No later than like 2 hours later, we were out on another mission because of one of the company's AAVs their driver had gotten killed and had been immobilized. That the Marines in that vehicle had dismounted, taken a building next to it, but the enemy were trying to overrun that position. So we came and responded to support them, and we eventually got some Abrams support to come with us, and we pulled those guys out. We needed the Abrams because we needed to tow the AAV out of that area. We weren't going to keep it for propaganda. Yeah. And there was also a dead Marine in there. We can't, leave that to the enemy. Resolved that issue, got back to the bay, back to our ad hoc headquarters, and continued to fight. The next couple of weeks, things didn't slow down. The enemy was always trying to outmaneuver us or change their tactics on us, but we continued to fight. And it was very disheartening when the news came that we were going to pull out of the city. We had such momentum. We'd taken ground. Our platoon had basically doubled the size of our AO in one little firefight when we went to remove a ad hoc roadblock down by the main mosque down in Michigan. And we'd been in some intense firefights with the enemy. And it was frustrating taking these casualties, and especially with Boy. So just walk away from it. But did that. Then about a month later, we were on a counter-mortar patrol, myself, and our Humvee was hit by 2 155 millimeter artillery shells that were buried in the ground. One in the front, one in the back. I don't remember much. I remember hearing my buddy scream, and that was, bone chilling. And it turned out I took a shot on the back of my head as they triaged all of us. The explosion was so big that 2 of the guys in the Humvee and Lieutenant Glover's vehicle got concussions, so it was a massive explosion. However, at the time in 2004, we didn't have combat replacements as they did back later on in the years. So basically, my driver had been shot in Fallujah through the firewall, and he'd stayed in the fob and waited 2-3 weeks, and then he was back with us. So he got blown up with us too. And as we recouped, I spent the night in Camp Fallujah. They pulled the shot on the back of my head, and then they just said bed rest for 2 days, and then light duty for about 4 or 5 days. And then the rest of the month or two we were in country, they just packed my head with sterile gauze twice a day to make sure the infection didn't get in there, because if they sutured it, an infection happened, it would have gone to my brain. Then came back from that, and then in 2005, we were told we would, normally in the Marine Corps you do 2 deployments and you're done. We're told we weren't going to have to do it. However, I was fapped out to a marksmanship training unit up in the 5th Marine Regiment. The battalion commander wanted us all back, so we all went back to Ramadi. I had just had stomach surgery, very evasive one, and I'd broken my hand as well. But when I realized my buddies were going, I wasn't going to sit behind the sidelines, so I went to Ramadi in spring of 2005 and did about 3 or 4 months there. And Ramadi was a very kinetic city. You left the wire, you knew you were going to get either shot, IED'd, or a complex ambush, or a combination of those 3 things. And of the first 5 KIAs, we had 3 of them were third-timers. And so, to me, it was, our numbers were running short for us. And so when they asked if, I wanted to extend, I said, no, I think it's best that I go home. I had to tell my mom that I was going that 3rd time. That broke her heart. So for me, it was just made sense to just get out and give myself an opportunity to maybe go to school and figure my next steps out in life.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Wade Spann on Veterans Chronicles. Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles, once again, is U.S. Marine Corps veteran Wade Spann. He joined us in our previous episode. He served in Iraq from the very first moments of the war, served 3 tours there, was wounded in the fierce fighting near Fallujah. He also served near Ramadi and later embarked on a nationwide journey to connect with his Marine friends and others facing challenges back on the home front. And we're thrilled to have him back for another episode. Wade, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Greg.
Well, when we left off on the previous episode, we've been talking about some very difficult moments in and around Fallujah, in and around Ramadi at some of the worst times in fighting the insurgency. One of the things I wanted to circle back to is just how much kinetic activity there was, and to just ask, is this something that you felt was something that was adequately trained for, or was this just a matter of adapting to what the enemy was doing on a moment-to-moment basis?
I'm going to take the Marine approach to it and say we adapted and overcame. As our tactics changed, they changed their tactics as well. It was a cat and mouse type engagement a lot of times. They also knew our rules of engagement, and they exploited them if at all possible. Many times in Fallujah were they housing or operating out of mosques. And I remember distinctly we were taking, one of their companies was taking some significant fire from a mosque, and they called up to the Command Operations Center, the COC, and I had a buddy that was in there operating the radios, and they were asking for air support, and they were getting denied because it had to be division approved. However, General Mattis had come on deck to inspect the lines and was up there. And when he heard the radio chatter, he jumped on the radio and gave his call sign and said approved. And quickly that mosque quieted up. Basically, the Marines stopped taking fire from it. In Fallujah and in Ramadi, there was countless times where we observed them towing the line of the ROEs just because they knew they could get around it. They knew our operating procedures, and they exploited them a lot of times. But a lot of times we were quick, and I remember one time, just the Lance Corporal can figure something out and observe things. And one Marine Landeros was checking himself out on a mirror, and he went to adjust the mirror, and it turned out that was a false wall, and there was a huge weapons cache in there. Yeah, that was the vanity of one Marine found huge weapons. And I believe in weapons cache there was actually a flamethrower and all sorts of armaments and stuff like that. And when you see a flamethrower, you realize, oh, wow, these, they're willing to attack us with anything. Yeah.
How restricted did you feel by the rules of engagement?
Every deployment, it got more and more restricted. And in Ramadi, you knew if you were going to fire a round, you were probably going to have to fill out, a big report and paperwork. Didn't stop us from engaging and having to fire those weapons, but it just became, I guess, more of a formal thing. And from my experiences during the invasion and in Fallujah, it's a dynamic situation. Definitely, in Fallujah, we were green lighted for any engagement that we needed to. If we felt threatened or needed to eliminate a threat, you were fine, especially in invasion. In Ramadi, it was very it felt almost bureaucratic. You had to justify this stuff in some cases. It felt like, not to say it didn't need to happen. You have to, as you are becoming a force that's there for the long term. You can't kill your way through this problem. You have to work with the people. You have to be willing to adapt to threats, but also change your course of action. You can't overwhelmingly shoot the enemy and not think that those bullets that pass through those walls aren't going to affect other citizens. That's how you can lose the war, by killing the wrong people. So the change I think I observed was, outside of Fallujah, was no longer was it overwhelming firepower at a pot shot. It was orientate, observe, see if you can maneuver around and find a way to catch these individuals, or if they decided to stand and fight, they didn't stand a chance.
How would you describe the Iraqi people?
I love them. From the invasion, the justification in my mind was complete. When we were in Sadar City, I remember two men approached us, and one was trying to express his gratitude. However, he couldn't speak because his tongue was cut out. And then he showed us his back, which were riddled with scars from lashes and being whipped. And his friend sort of threw broken English and our own broken interpreters and stuff like that, explained that Saddam had done that to him and that he was grateful that we had come and liberated him. And from then on, I knew that in my mind we were doing the right thing. And in Fallujah, my interactions with the civilian population was always good. I enjoyed, hanging with the kids and engaging with the families, because that's their future. If I act heavy-handed with these people, then they're going to remember that. So for me, it was always treat them with respect, be understanding of their situation. And for me, it was eye-opening, growing up in Northern Virginia, and to see that, it really humbled me. And I still feel like we've given them a lot of opportunity to better their lives, because that's every adult that you'd engage is, I believe the desire for them has always been, I want a better life for my future, my kids. So I feel like we really put in an effort to do that now. Only time will tell.
So you came home in 2005, and what was life like for you when you got home?
Whirlwind. I got out of the Marine Corps, and I drove cross country with my brother, which was therapeutic in itself. I got home on a Thursday, and that following Tuesday I was enrolled full-time for that fall semester at the community college, Northern Virginia Community College. And that was a whirlwind. I couldn't tell you, that first semester was hard, because I had gotten home from Ramadi in mid-June and back to Camp Pendleton, and about a month and a half to out-process. At the time, looking back on it, I probably should have tried to see a medical. Had my injuries happened 3 or 4 years later, from my understanding, they probably would have medicaled me out. But at the time, medical discharge was a unicorn, unheard of in the infantry. You didn't know anybody that had done it and knew anything. So I just got myself out of there. I had one objective, which was to go home and go to school. And I did that. And enrolling in school, I was full bore into school, studying, just that was my focus. And I think that helped. And coming home and having that network of friends that I had grown up with, a lot of them were still in the area, it really helped. I definitely had my issues, but dedicating myself to school and really committing to that really was eye-opening, and I felt like I was accomplishing something.
Now, in our previous discussion, you mentioned when you were near Fallujah and your unarmed Humvee hit the IEDs and the concussion that resulted from that. We know now that you suffered traumatic brain injury. Did you know that at the time?
All of us in the vehicle knew something was wrong with us. I think I remember going to Balboa for a study early on, but then I redeployed to Ramadi. I had to carry a notebook with me. Well, all of us did, and write down things, because they would just escape our minds and stuff like that. But getting out, I think the VA initially rated me with a concussion with memory loss. Only years later, when I started hearing about TBI, did I get it reevaluated. But yeah, going to school, mnemonic devices really helped me out. I had a lot of tutoring. I think I was in the tutoring office. I became friends with the person that operated the tutoring office because I was there that consistently. And it was just, a struggle, but I was committed because I didn't want to fail. So knowing now and looking back on it, I did it a hard way, a knuckleheaded way, but I got through it.
So when you graduated from Northern Virginia Community College, what happened next?
I had met a fellow Marine at a bar, surprisingly, in Arlington. And he was actually out of the Marine Corps, and he had been discharged out of Bethesda Naval Medical Center. He had lost his leg in an IED attack. And we quickly bonded. And he was going to George Washington University at the time, and he was like, you should apply. And to this day, I credit to him for me applying. I didn't think I could get into a place like that. And when I got accepted, it was monumental for me. I went to school at GW, and while we were there, I tried to get involved in extracurricular activities. I joined the row team. I was the oldest freshman on the row team, or I was a junior, but on the freshman team. While we were there, I realized that the school didn't have any idea of what its veterans were doing, how many veterans it had. We had issues with getting our stuff certified. So we started a veterans group on campus. And my senior year was our inaugural year, and we started to really see some changes there. It was myself and 2 other veterans that started that, and out of that, it's grown into something really impressive. I ran into someone who's going there now and was saying praises about the organization there. So I'm really happy to hear that. While at GW, we created a veterans organization, and we did some really impactful things for the veterans going to school there. Got services, got a lot of benefit out of that, and as well as I got 2 opportunities to testify before 2 congressional subcommittees. While I was in school, that's when the suicide started hitting. My platoon was racked with some bad suicides. Nelson was the first that we had heard about, and then my best friend Saparsky, who blown up with me, he was a vehicle commander when in Fallujah with us. He was my best friend. Cold as ice on the radio during combat. He was just a really good combat leader. Very effective. In Ramadi, he was meritoriously promoted to staff sergeant, which is unheard of. He's a walking legend in my mind, and he'd been decorated, highly decorated. A lot of my platoon commanders were highly decorated, and his suicide really impacted me to this day. And because of that, I testified on congressional subcommittee about suicide prevention. And then after I graduated, I testified on the VA's vocational rehabilitation. So
we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back on Veterans Chronicles. We're back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corumbus. Thanks for being with us, talking with Marine Corps veteran Wade Spann. Served 3 tours in Iraq. And Wade, we just took a break at a very poignant time. You're talking about the suicides and how you got involved in dealing with this. It led to some congressional testimony, but it also led to some other things. And tell the story about how it led up to this long trip around the country, ministering or at least serving other veterans.
Yeah, so after graduating from GW, it seemed like at least once or twice a year we'd find out about another suicide. One of the worst ones I found out about was Heinzig. He was one of our machine gunners in our platoon, and turned out he had killed himself less than a year after getting out of the Marine Corps. And the tragedy was he'd done it in front of his father, and 5 years later, his father had taken his own life. And only years later did we find out about this, and it just felt like that family had suffered so much, and who from the Marine Corps, our unit, was there to represent them, and it was such a tragedy any way you look at it. So I graduated from GW, started working abroad overseas for a British private security company in Iraq and Afghanistan. I found that was my coping mechanism in diving headlong into work. And I denied myself that I had any mental issues with this. If I was over there, nothing was wrong with me. I definitely was addicted to the adrenaline rush. I definitely yearned for that. It was only after a year of doing that in Iraq and coming home and then working in that private security industry for about 4.5 years that I realized I needed to change. And so I started getting counseling through an organization called givenhour.org. Just found it, and because the VA wanted me to wait 6 months before I could see somebody, and I wasn't going to do group. And I give a lot of credit to Give an Hour and my counselor, Maura, for helping me find a way. From that, I started going to that, and I did see the benefit of seeking help. The stigma associated was alive and present, definitely, especially in the industry that I worked. But I knew I had one life to live, and I had to live it the best way forward. That going forward, started going to counseling, started getting more involved, based on my experience with the veterans group on GW, and had some connections. And I started really to try and tie myself to either services that could help me. While I changed careers into IT sales, I was, dove heading first into that and was thinking I was better, but what scared me was the coping mechanisms stopped working. Alcohol, the womanizing, the abuse of all these vices stopped working, and that really scared me. And so I sort of had to take a break. And I knew that the life I was living wasn't of purpose and wasn't of meaning to myself and to the guys that were lost. So I tried to figure that out. And so best thing I could do was another road trip. I figured, what's the worst thing I can do? I have a very great network here and amazing friends, and I think that it shows when one lends you his truck so you can drive cross country. Lent me his, my buddy Bill Weigel lent me his truck, and I drove for 15,000 miles plus for 3 months, all the way up to North Maine, all the way out to the west coast of Seattle, and in between, stopping at various either Marines I served with or veterans I knew. I asked them a series of questions as well, to sort of just, I intended to write some of this down and make something, produce something. Filmed, did a lot of documenting of this trip, and for me I felt at peace finally, and I'd quit drinking that very first day I started that road trip. I quit drinking, and that whole change really set my life up for the better. All the way to Washington State, and then I shot down south. And I stayed off the main highways as much as possible, try to get on country roads, Highway 1, Highway 101. And it just was its own therapy in itself, being able to reach out and touch these Marines and see how they're doing and check on them. And everybody was eager to meet with me for the most part, and it was just good. And I found my roommate, John Staples, in Ohio. Nobody had heard from him in 11 years. Yeah, he'd been, unfortunately, in and out of incarceration. And that morning, to be able to put my hands on him and hug him was one of the best memories of my life. He was my best friend. He still is my best friend. So it was really nice to be able to connect with him. Going throughout this country and reconnect with those guys really was therapeutic. And I think the guys benefited from it too, I'd hope. So yeah, I did that for 3 months all across this country and got to see the beauty of this nation, which is vast, and it's amazing. Simply amazing place.
Did you get out of it what you expected, or would you say it was a lot more?
Definitely a lot more. When I came home, I had two purposes. Like, I thought I was on 2 goals. Come home, definitely write every day about this experience, and then also study for the LSATs to take my LSAT and hopefully go back to school and change my career. However, when I got home, I hit the deepest depression I've ever been in, and that was hard. And I think I had a little bit too long of a depression, and I didn't end up reading. I beat myself up for that stuff, for not writing and not studying for LSATs. But in the end, it worked out. While I came home and fought through that depression, I started doing alternative therapies. Whatever veteran organization or wherever I could find an alternative therapy, I was going to do it. I wasn't going to try and solve that solution through the pill form. And it worked out in my favor. I connected with veteran organizations all across this country and found purpose in transcendental meditation through Boulder Crest Retreat. An organization called No Barriers helped me. I applied for that and was able to do summits with other groups of veterans and found healing in getting out into the backcountry. I found that I was at peace in the backcountry and felt connected. Learned a lot of healthier coping mechanisms and skills that I wasn't being taught, and I've now learned that this stuff is life-changing and life-saving. All of the various outdoor activities, engagement with other veterans, just talking. And I found myself being a mentor in the Fairfax County Veteran Court, which in itself, I didn't consider myself a mentor, but I knew they needed him. And my counselor had recommended it to me. And it made me feel good, and I feel like the mentees benefited from it as well.
Wait, let's take one more break. We'll be right back here on Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles on Radio America Network. I'm Greg Corombos. Thanks for being with us. We're in the second part of our 2-part interview with Wade Spann. 3 tours in Iraq with the U.S. Marine Corps. He's been walking us through his incredible service to our country and then the battles that he's been dealing with since he got back home. And Wade, we just talked about your cross-country journey and the alternative therapies that you've undergone and how those really did help you. Where would you say you are now?
Definitely in a better place, and I'm grateful for being in a better place. Found another job and have been working this past year. And because of the hard work I put into working on myself, I believe that's how I've been doing better. But recently, the news of my recent diagnosis, I was hospitalized late November and December, and I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and MS, and I'd be taking it a lot worse had I not done those few years off to work on myself. I learned better coping mechanisms. I quit drinking. I don't have any more alcohol in my life. And had this news happened 4 years earlier, 5 years earlier, it would have been a lot more detrimental. I would have taken it a lot worse. But because of the foundational skills I learned, I believe that I'm now dealing with this diagnosis, and I'm gonna fight my way through it. I'm gonna champion it. But yeah, so nowadays, I still remain active. I still try to take veterans into the backcountry, help them out. I really see the value in a lot of these veteran organizations, helping veterans in different forms. There's no magic bullets that's going to resonate with all the veterans. It's you sort of have to try them all, and you take what you use out of it, and then leave the rest. There's been the generosity of Americans and its willingness to help us is touching, to say the least. I've benefited directly because people are willing to help me, and therefore I try to pay it forward. Whether it's talking to veterans, just reaching out to the guys I served with, letting them know that these things, we're going to have peaks and valleys, but it's how we recover and dust ourselves off. And it's about staying connected with each other. The guys we lose, I tend to realize that it's the guys that fall off the map, so to speak. With Saparsky, it was a little bit different. I had spoken to him a week prior. My old platoon commander had dinner with him the night before. But staying connected has been really beneficial. There's a local charity here called Azalea's Charities. And when we did a 10-year reunion, they helped us. They raised over $23,000 for us to have a reunion. And we had a reunion. We were able to fly. A lot of these Marines and service members couldn't afford to fly in hotels. Because of that money, we were able to use it to sort of give them quote-unquote scholarships and allow them to attend this at no cost to them, and some of their families attend and their kids. And I think where I'm seeing the trend is reunions are going to be what's healing for most of us. It allows people to come out of those dark places and know that they're with a trusted group, and that they can be honest and open up, and if they need help. And what I've seen in some of those other veteran organizations like 3-8 Veterans for Fallujah and Ramadi, they're sort of self-healing. Now that they've been established for a few years, they have these reunions that are at a week-long time at somebody's Airbnb house, but it's got to be in a house because you can't hide in a house. You have common areas, and guys start showing up every even for a day, but they're there for a week, or the houses were there for a week. I show up, stop in and sort of show face, and then they'll start talking about their other buddy that's kind of, they can pull them out of the darkness. And then with Azalea's Charities and 3-8, Veterans of Fallujah and Ramadi, what they've been able to do is, create a fund. And if, so-and-so doesn't, that Marine might not come forward and say, hey, I haven't paid my rent in 2 months, but maybe his girlfriend or his significant other will. As well as, guys say, hey, I'm in a hard spot right now. One of the best successes is a Marine I know from 3-8. 7 years on the streets, addicted to heroin, had a bad conduct discharge. These are the guys that I know personally. I served with guys from 1-5 that got bad conduct discharges after our first and second deployments. I know it. It's detrimental. It's a catch-22. They can't get service from the VA, but they can't. But the whole reason they're there is because they are having mental issues, and they turn to drugs or alcohol or bad behavior. This Marine, 7 years addicted to heroin, And his other charities sponsored him to get a local inpatient therapy. VA wouldn't touch him. He came out of that with another habit, less detrimental maybe. He does ultra endurance races, 50 milers. And that when he graduated from his rehab, we were there to support him for a 50 miler in this area. And that was truly incredible to come, the camaraderie and just to come together to support this guy who's struggled for a lot of his life and now is turning it around, and now he's giving back. It's just humbling to be a part of the strength of these people and the perseverance. So, you know, I think the trend for me and what I want to do for other veterans is facilitate maybe reunions or getting y'all involved with that. And definitely this year, another road trip is definitely due to, if possible, if I can make it happen, I would really like to do another road trip. This time I want to take veterans out into the local parks, the camp near them, so they know that they don't have to go, you know, too far, and they can find peace and solace, hopefully, in that. And maybe showing them the ropes and getting them out in the backcountry can give them an alternative to maybe turning to those other vices that are less healthy. You know, I've ruined a lot of relationships in my past. There's a lot of, you know, relationships that I sort of burnt down either intentionally or subconsciously due to my own issues. And now I'm getting healthier and realizing that. And I feel like it's for the better. You know, my life's on an upward trajectory now. The recent diagnosis has taken me down a peg or two, but I think what I've learned and drawn from is perseverance, and that you gotta come out the other side, no matter how tough it gets, and that you can reach out to your buddies. You know, I think the big thing is a lot of guys feel isolated. They can't reach out to them. They feel like they're a failure, they're losers, and you couldn't be farther from the truth. They're sick. They need help, and a lot of veterans don't need handouts. And please don't give handouts to veterans. They just need assistance. They need time to recoup, recover, and then I guarantee you what you're going to see out of those people is something you never even thought of.
Is there something you've seen where these veterans who are struggling, maybe their loved ones have essentially said the same things that you would say to them, but because you've been there, they respond in a different way?
I don't want to say that because of me.
But their brothers who have experienced yes. what they've experienced, it registers with them in a way that those who weren't there can't.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. You know, I think, you know, when you can relate to someone due to personal experiences and past experiences, you're definitely going to have a better connection. You know, that's part of the reason why I do the veteran mentorship in Fairfax County. They don't have a lot of guys my age that have the time or the ability sometimes to do that mentoring. It's a lot of Vietnam guys, and they connect with these guys, but it's a generational gap. But being able to, you know, say, yeah, man, I was there. I get it. It's tough, you know, and especially coming back to a society that's it's very isolating. I think Sebastian Junger's book Tribe really hits the nail on the head when he talks about, you know, over there we have a very close-knit tribe, and it's definitely evident in the guys that I still keep in contact with. But when you come back here, you're scattered to the wind, and you're trying to find that tribe. And I think my success and my ability to persevere has been coming home to this network of friends that I have that, it turns out, a lot of us joined the military, and we all had similar experiences, and we've been able to support each other, and family has been there to support each other. But a lot of guys, they join the Marines to get out of their small podunk town, and then they find themselves 6 years later there, and they feel a little bit disheartened by that, you know. So it's tough, but being able to talk to them and let them know that it's okay, you know. We've done a lot of things that most people haven't. Now, it shouldn't turn into cockiness and arrogance, but it should be humbling. And by sharing our experiences to the general public and greater U.S. citizens, people know what sacrifice is, know what it means to, you know, have to go away and you know, go through some trauma. A lot of us went through a lot of trauma, and it's about how you cope with that trauma and deal with that trauma. And it's difficult, but there's solutions to it, and it's not all through the bottles and pills and all those other vices that I think aren't doing us very much favors.
And I don't mean this to pile on the VA, but I think a lot of times people think, well, if they've got problems, the VA will be there for them. And in many cases, maybe they are. In some cases, maybe they're not. But it sounds like the more personal rather than the large entity is perhaps a more effective connection for them.
Definitely, Greg. I mean, the VA does its best. It really does have a lot of people dedicated to it, but it also has a bureaucracy and it creates indifference. I've seen it directly, that the indifference, in the VA hospital in Washington, D.C. It's a hard pill to swallow, but you just got to fight through it. There are some people there, staff there, that are generally trying to do the right thing and want to move the needle up. Sometimes bureaucracy gets in the way. What I find is these nonprofits can sometimes cut through that red tape because they don't have that same bureaucracy. But it's about, there's no silver bullet. It's about providing numerous resources and opportunities to veterans. You can give handouts out, but they're going to continue to come. But if you give them an opportunity and you let them dictate their success and their future and empower them, and not just with like a job that's with no career. If you can give veterans careers, they're a great product. It's been proven many times over what you get when you hire a veteran or such. But it takes time, and it takes people willing to not think of us as broken or a liability. It takes people willing to learn about veterans and understand where they come from and their unique abilities. And so I like to, encourage and teach, either hiring managers or whatnot to go to learn about it and learn what some of these acronyms are on that resume or things like that. It's going to help a lot more veterans because then they're going to feel like they have control. I think when a lot of us get down and hard is we start to feel like we don't have control of these things. The VA, it works sometimes, and sometimes it fails hard, fails big time. The VA's done me well sometimes, and then it's also created its own unique frustrations and difficulties, dealing with it currently.
So it's been almost 18 years since you went to Parris Island. You've been through a lot of challenges, but now you're also helping a lot of people as a result of your military service. When you think about those 18 years and your time in uniform, what do you think of most?
The camaraderie, the love we have for each other. It's life-changing. I really feel like the biggest thing is now that we communicate to each other and we check in on each other. That whole experience in the Marine Corps was just amazing. There was some hard times. It's the bitter and the sweet. The saddest, most upsetting days were in the Marines, but also some of the most engaging and feeling like I've done something with my life were those days as well. So you get the peaks and the valleys, as they say. And it's about just recognizing that and learning that, okay, sometimes I'm in that valley. I'm going to reach out to my buddies. I'm going to reach out to those guys and get a laugh. Who cares if they're going to make fun of me for something I did in the past? That's part of the telling stories and reliving those moments. But it lightens it, and it makes us remember those days. I think fondly of those days, and without a doubt, I'm better for having those experiences, not without.
Well, Wade, we thank you for your service. We thank you for being so open about what you've gone through over the past number of years and how hard you're working to make sure that other folks get the same type of help and support that you have gotten along the way. We wish you the very best in your health, and we thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate it, and appreciate this opportunity to speak.
Wade Spann is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, served 3 tours in Iraq, and has now been very much involved in making sure other veterans have the support and resources they need following their service in combat. I'm Greg Corumbus. This is Veterans Chronicles.